Hey Steve, good morning. How are you doing?
Hey, doing well, Reed. How are you?
Oh, doing pretty well today. Yeah, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's good to be back. Been on
Yeah,
a
this
couple of times
is
now. So,
second or third time, I think. At least no, third time
third.
probably, because you've been on at
Yeah,
least twice
definitely.
for some other streams. Yeah. Um, I think it's as we've done some streams together and also had some opportunities to coordinate between the two sequel bits and everything else. I know that we've ended up finding a lot of common grounds in some of the trainings and other stuff and content that we've had. So I think there kind of been a natural progression to eventually kind of covering some topics collectively together. And in this case, like things that you can do to help upgrade and kind of enhance the architecture that you have from a kind of a Power BI or a Power Platform perspective. So I'm happy to be talking about this with you today for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, as you say, me and Reed, we've worked a lot together, and really, I think our experience going through and just looking and learning from our own mistakes and mistakes of others, and really looking at how to do things well, do those best practices, and stop falling down in holes that we've probably fallen in ourselves or seen other people fall in.
Yeah, it's in a lot of ways they're like the two halves of a coin. Like the every pitfall to avoid is usually a best practice to implement. So it depends on which direction you're addressing it from. Are you trying to show the things that you shouldn't do, or is it the coming from the perspective of the things that you should? But it's usually in that sense. There's always the other half of that of the thing to avoid. So
Definitely.
yeah. And overall, for some context, one thing that's Steve and I have done somewhat successfully this year, and thankfully for both of us, is we've basically put together quite a lot of content on enterprise architecture and enhancement, both from the tenant and the service perspective, as well as from the actual data models, the reports. So kind of everything from the artifact level all the way up to the tenant administration and service level and lots of content, a few days worth, honestly, of that. And we figured that there would be an opportunity to share at least some of that kind of on a stream today, have some conversations around that. What are some principles and best practices to implement? What are some of the things, the gotchas to avoid? So we figured there would be a good opportunity to do a stream to cover some of these. A lot more content that's available to cover in an hour, but we feel that there's a good opportunity to share some of that today on the stream, and then also have an opportunity later to provide some links for some additional resources and some upcoming trainings on this as well if people are interested in further learnings and resources from there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, as Reed said, there's a couple of things we've been doing together. I think there's been some really exciting and really cool stuff that we've
Forever.
done, and we've had a lot of fun talking to everyone as well who's gone through the
Mhm.
courses. Had some really great conversations. So as Reed said, I think this is an opportunity. I know not everyone has a chance to be in those, so we really wanted to open this up for the next hour, just kind of talk through. I think highlight some of our favorite things that we talk about and that we've talked about together.
I wanted to. I'm impressed with the number of people we got so far. In general, anytime we do one of these, I know you're the LinkedIn master, and you managed to get a good amount of extra people in. We have 62 at the moment, so please, as we talk about any of these conversations, whether or not it's data sets, reports, any of the things that we go into from service architecture as well, please drop questions into the chat. As always, I will make sure to put those onto the screen above. Start the question with a little bit of a cue if you can. That will help me to kind of make sure I'm grabbing the appropriate information. And I can filter through the comments. And I'm just actually remembering I need to, there we go, drop the associated comment to remind that. So yeah, I want to keep this as conversational as possible. But for the people not familiar with you, Steve, if you want to start with a little bit of background about yourself, and also maybe some recent news if you're wanting to share that on where you are in your career as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Reed. So my name's Steve Campbell. I specialize, just like Reed, in all things kind of Microsoft data, especially the BI space. Most recently, I've been at a large consultancy for Cognizant. So I kind of ran a data analytics team in the EMEA region, so Europe, essentially was most of the team. We did mostly Power BI, but also some backend stuff, and we worked with the data and AI team and cool technologies like Databricks, and now, of course, Microsoft Fabric. Recently, though, I have left and in the process of just leaving. So I'm launching my own consultancy, my own thing here, and it's going to be next week. If you follow me on LinkedIn, we'll have all the details. But really focusing on Microsoft BI, Fabric, Power BI, all this sort of stuff, as well as doing a lot of focus in training. Me and Reed, as we say, we already have some training and we expect that to kind of ramp up. So I'm really, really excited to do that and go ahead and meet a lot more people in the community.
Well, both with some, I think, live trainings that we're delivering online, which seems to work very well, and then getting some recorded content, which is something that we're both familiar with. So getting a couple things on there for some recorded learning. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's give you a little bit of an applause there for a transition. It's going independence, something that not everybody wants to do, but for the people who have the motivation and the desire too, 'cause not everybody wants to go that route. It's the autonomy and the freedom that comes with it. I can say it's a lot of fun. There's definitely a few months where you're juggling too many projects, and I mean, there's a lot of effort that goes into just running the business versus just getting paid to do a job. But if you want to go, skip off for a month somewhere and take a trip to like Australia or something, you just simply let your clients know, hey, by the way, I'll be answering emails maybe occasionally, but I'm just not going to work for 6 weeks, and you just go somewhere.
Definitely. And I know that's something that me and Reed both enjoy to do, to go travel and meet new people.
A small amount of an addiction. Yeah.
Definitely.
But I think transitioning from that, if we, from a high level, and maybe to give us a couple of cue prompts, I can throw up here this slide and transition that. So some of the stuff that we'll be talking about today, again, we're going to get as much as we can into about an hour, have some really good takeaways for a lot of best practices and tips related to the items here below, with a little bit of a nudge and a nod if people are interested in some additional content that's coming up as far as some structured training that we're delivering. But we still want to give you some really cool insights and things to take away on a lot of things from all the way from the artifact to the tenant level, and a lot of the really good gotchas, takeaways, and pitfalls for that. So if you were kind of envisioning this a little bit, Steve, do you want to just kind of start from the top down, or what are some topics that most excite you that we can dive into in a fun little discussion?
Yeah, definitely. So part of this, and as Reed said, of course, this does cover a structured course that we're dissecting here today. I want to go through some elements of. A lot of this came from, as we mentioned earlier, kind of me and Reed's experience. We put our hands together, combined, and thought of, what are the best things for myself when I was, running my teams. We were doing enterprise, big deployments with some customers, had a lot of teams. I also was in charge of helping train and develop people. And it's a big thing. I think I even spoke, Reed, with you on the live stream about this and learning paths, and really looking at this best practices. I think looking at the best practices and why we do the best practices. And that's really, I like this top one, enhancing the model design. I think this really talks around doing things correctly and reasons why. So I'm interested into hearing you kind of what you would say is the 100-foot view of when we talk about enhancing the model design, a couple of tips and why you think we should do it.
Absolutely. So as far as the model design enhancement, and also cover a little bit of report design enhancement as well, because today, we have a single PBX file like that. That story is changing and evolving a bit now with project files, but generally the front end, back end, end-to-end experience for a report is going to be your report and your data set. And ideally, you want to increase adoption for both, whether or not that is ensuring that you're from the very front end with the consumers, that the report's being used, and it also is as simple and clean and easy to use as possible in terms of the interface, the design, the visuals, the flow of information, the story that it's trying to tell. But even from the modeling perspective, Microsoft, with its platform, very much encourages shared data sets. But a lot of times, if you're looking at a data set, or you go to get data, you connect to a Power BI data set, and you're trying to leverage one of those to build a report, and you look for the word sales or date or something else, and you end up with 15 fields that show up with that name. Then it becomes the question of like, all right, okay, sales order date, let's use that. But now you're using something from your fact table. The calculations aren't working correctly. So there's a lot of curation and optimization that kind of goes into the design of the actual fields in terms of the organization, making sure proper ones are visible. Even perspectives to a degree can be leveraged with this a little bit to kind of curate a filtered list for particular audiences. But it's kind of a mixture of art and science that goes into those. And actually do have a few things that I can share on that I'd like to go into a bit to talk about those. But as I mentioned, all of this really is kind of designed to be for focus and usability. Like what fields are visible or not, whether or not you have hierarchies, like there's no performance impact. But if you have a promoted or certified data set to any degree and you're wanting to increase the adoption of that, you need to make sure that Sharon or Bob, who has zero understanding of a relational database, does no fact and dimension tables, they just need to have a visual, and they need to be able to grab a categorical field like product, geography, or date, and they need to be able to grab a metric, any calculation. They need to be able to grab any of those, combine them into a visual, and it just works. I'll actually give just a little shout out to Kurt Bueller, who wrote a great article on how to identify and organize like visual level or report level measures and when those should or should not be visible. But the end result of a perfect data set, in my mind, is that every column should be able to be used with every calculation. And again, like perfect world scenario, and you can put it into a visual and it will subtotal or at least return something reasonable or valid. Like, and there's obviously exceptions to this, but ideally the majority of your model, you can just drag and drop into any visual, whether or not that is on your X or Y axis or anything else. You can combine them and something relevant will show up. If not, then those are the ones that you want to start hiding or having exceptions or considerations for, or creating special perspectives. But it should just work when you bring it in, because the people using it have little to no understanding of the things that get built into a model, why they get built in. And it's easy for a model to become very complex. And of course, once we hit complexity, that's when people start like, well, screw it. I have no idea how to use this. I don't want to go and have to submit a ticket to figure it out and wait 2 weeks. I'm just going to go build my own model. And then you end up with a data silo scenario where you have hundreds of reports with hundreds of individual data sets. And then when you have a meeting, people are wanting to know why their numbers are different because they've done different transformations. So I've seen a lot of pitfalls, if we're going to use that word, in these scenarios of people not properly leveraging shared data sets or things that could be reused, whether or not that's a data set or a data flow or anything else, because either A, they're not properly it's not properly shared in terms of just awareness of it, or whatever is shared is just too complex. I have a couple of things that I want to show on that too, but from your perspective, Steve, as well, like what's been some of your observations on some of the benefits, but also pitfalls of trying to get that adoption between either the reports or the data sets themselves?
Yeah, I want to touch on a few key, really interesting points you brought up. The first one I'd say is Reed mentioned, the shared data set. And obviously, shared data set, the idea is we want to use this data set more than once, right? Of course, we want to have efficiencies, have a single source of truth. Something that I do when we go to companies and when we deploy, I do a lot of governance and helping actually deploy Power BI within the organization. Generally, organizations have a bit of Power BI going on. We always measure, one of our key metrics is we call it the data set to report ratio. Really easy metric to figure out. You get your data sets and you get your reports and you see the ratio of how many reports on average to a data set. Usually, most companies are about 1.1, which what that means is for every one data set, there's about 1.1 reports.
Is it that? So, like I definitely have tracked it unofficially, and I know that's an aim that I've had, but is that an actual observed metric that you've seen with like that low of a bar? Ooh.
Often, and bear in mind, of course, when we go in to do governance, generally we're helping set it up. So this is probably not something that a lot of companies are doing. We can take some things like take away your personal workspace, all that, but yeah, generally it is very low. And I think this is an evolution, and part of our roles as developers, although we might not be in charge of this, is to actually try and make good enough data sets that we can get this number up, right? And that comes from the data set developer having that knowledge to say, hey, I'm making this to share, really, really helps. And it will really help you as a Power BI developer, or whatever your role is, to really push and help the adoption and be seen. And I think a key part to this as well, always assume when you're making a data set that you're not going to be maintaining it forever. Assume someone else is going to be taking it over from day one when you start making it. Put descriptions in things, right? Yes. Do it as you build. I know Reed very happy with that one. When you make a column, when you make a measure, put a description in it. It doesn't have to be fantastically detailed at the beginning, but just get in the habit of doing that as you build, and it will really, really help you as to keep this instead of trying to do it all at the end.
Some of the ones that you're mentioning, kind of like listed here, is the most common model properties that you'd be configuring are, it's proper names. You've already mentioned the descriptions. And one of the benefits of this as a best practice is the fact that they come up as tooltips. So if you have a description of any type typed into any of the fields, which would be your tables, columns, measures, hierarchies, and all that, it pops up to give an explanation of that. There's also a script that I did a video on this like 2 years ago. There's a script in Tabular Editor where you can do like a for each, and it basically takes your measure, the actual code in your DAX measure. So like calculate sum of sales amount, product category equals bikes or something like that. And it sticks it into the description, because when you connect to a live model, there is a little bit of a black box of like, I see sales variance, but variance to what? Maybe it was, let's assume that the name isn't super detailed, and it shouldn't be hyper detailed anyways. You ideally don't want to measure name that's like massively long. But the description can provide more of that. So you can run a description tabular editor. That's, I think, is a good practice for shared data sets, and it immediately takes the code and puts it into the description in one click. So then if you hover over it, you see the code. So for the people who actually care to maybe just look at the code a bit to see what filters are being added to that, if the numbers are different than what they might expect, that gives some transparency to what's happening in the back end. It exposes a little bit of the model, but without them actually be able to, to touch the code, so to speak. So like that's actually one little trick that I find that's quite useful. And actually, like once I have you talking for a minute on something else, I'll actually quickly grab that link. But I think that's actually a really clever use of the description that I found.
Funnily enough, as you say that, earlier today, I was actually connected to my own live model and had completely forgot what the measures were, because I hadn't done this, and I had to go back, find my model, and go into the edit mode just to remember my code. So even if it's not for someone else, it will help yourself when you start doing things with reports.
Yeah, I love that I could just Google measures and descriptions, tabular editor, Havens Consulting, and it gives me the link. So I don't even remember the exact name of the blog, but I do appreciate how keyword friendly Google is when I want to search for something. So I'm dropping that into the chat here now. But that is here's the blog post, which was 2020. So yeah, that was 3.5 years ago that I wrote that. It does not seem like that long, but it was. Another one that I want to call out on just on this page while we're talking about it now is synonyms is one of those things, like, I guess you could use it, like, and Q&A is a great product selling feature. And I think both you and I can agree that Microsoft over the years there's kind of two things that they often release as part of the product release plan, or historically they have. There's a thing that keeps the Gartner Magic Quadrant, right? The one that has a little dot in the upper right corner, where Microsoft's always like the industry leader in that. There's products that move the dot in that direction, and then there's products that people will actually use. And Q&A is one of those that very innovative. When you had the option to ask a question in a dashboard 5 years ago, and it would generate a visual for you. I never have met that many clients or people that ever use that. It's a cool idea, but a well-built report should already give you the information you need for the most part. Very few users want to go generate their own visuals or know how to or what questions to ask. They just give me the right charts, give me a slicer, let me solve it. So synonyms I've found it's a way to enhance it. I've very rarely ever built it out because it's a lot of time and effort. But all this is coming back to the conversation to say that now with Fabric and with all the ChatGPT and Copilot stuff coming out, I think this is going to have a bit of a renaissance for itself because the QA is going to get smarter. I think it's going to be easier to configure without having to spend hours to build that out. So I can imagine QA type stuff in the next 6 to 12 to 24 months is going to come back as this new powerful feature, mostly because it's going to be much easier to incorporate, but then also have it self-learn to just be a lot better at being able to ask many different nuanced questions and actually have it return something relevant versus basically useless visuals, which without a properly synonymed and curated model, QA can be very confusing. But I'm curious on your thoughts.
I think that's a great point. And my advice would be get ready for this. We talk a lot about, I think everyone's been talking about generative AI, all of this coming within context like reporting, and you see, chat GPT code analyzer. It's really, really good at looking through lots and lots of data very quickly. So
I haven't used that one yet. So it's called the ChatGPT code analyzer, because I've used Copilot built into GitHub and a bunch of that other stuff, but I've not done the code analyzer itself.
The code interpreter, I mean. So it's
thank you.
GPT-4.
Yes.
So
okay, yep.
Yeah, stuff like that. Obviously that's not a Power BI Microsoft product, but it gives you a good glimpse of what these generative AI things do. Really good at finding seemingly hard to find insights in lots of data. So I have loads of data. I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't know what to look for. This is a really good way of quickly helping us out. With that, I think, as a Power BI developer, that makes me really excited, because now my focus is a lot more on, we need to get these nice data sets. We need to get these enterprise things set up. People know how to use them, that the backend developers can maintain them, can keep them in this really nice schema, really nice looking way, that these algorithms, this stuff can work even better. So I think that's a really good point and a really good focus on enterprise and doing things well.
I agree. And one other little, I would say, takeaway on both features that are available today, but then will also get better, is we've had, to a degree, some auto optimizers, like best practices analyzer and a few other things like that. But I can imagine that even stuff like that, because Michael Kowalski built a really good data set and best practice report analyzer that helps to look at things from a technical perspective, to help you clean up the model to a degree, which is the making sure that you don't have any long int, key columns are hidden, stuff like that. But I do think that as some type of copilots can be leveraged for that more, I do think more of the art rather than the science perspective of that, like product key, almost universally, like on a fact table, that's just something you should hide from your fields list. But then those questions on, like, if somebody searches for sales or the word date or those other, from a user perspective, what are those soft best practices that are not always the case, but sometimes the case? I think the tech will start to be able to identify those and help to flag those as, like, there's the red versus yellow warnings of things you want to consider for your model. So long story short, I think that any of those auto scanners and tools that will have recommendations on how to curate your model and even curate the report, I think will continue to get better, as we can basically just ask these AI tools, like, what else would you suggest or recommend as things that we can incorporate into an external tool, or any red easy button that we can press to clean up our model. Plus, with the updates to Tyndall, coming out. So we basically, we have a readable format for our model, which will make it easier for tools to be written that can, one click make changes to that. I hope at some point in the future we'll also get that for the reporting layer, because I know that I've tried to dig into the report layout file, and it is the escape formatted JSON that is in there is an absolute nightmare to either extract information out of, and you can't really write to it. It's not officially unless you hack the model. But I just want everything in Power BI from the report to the data set. I just want people to have an easy way to write automated tools to be able to do one-click cleanups, optimizations, or changes. Everything should be able to be automated to a degree. And I see a light at the end of the tunnel for the tool sets for this in the next 12 to 24 months to just talk a little bit about some of the things that excite me.
Yeah, I think that's excites me too. And something you mentioned, which I find really interesting, is Tyndall and this new way of being able to analyze the model. So for those who haven't heard of Tyndall, within a data set, we have two elements, I always like to say. We have the data itself, right? So it's a backup of a database of some kind that's stored wherever, the actual numbers that you're calculating. The other side is you have the metadata. And this is really your model. And this is things that Tabular Editor interacts with. So if you've ever used Tabular Editor, it doesn't read your data. It just reads this metadata. Things like the measures, the relationships, the structure and layout. Now, this is all code to the computer, but we can actually view this, and that's how Tabular Editor does. And previously, this was in a format called Timsel, and it's just a one big JSON file, which we can't really read it very well as humans. Doesn't look very good. Tyndall is actually a new kind of structure designed by a guy here called Matthias. He lives over in the UK.
Yep.
It's not actually any different. Yeah, excellent. Tyndall and Timsel, right? They're just representations, we like to say, because the metadata is all code to the computer. It's just how we view it and we interact with it. So both are the same. One's not replacing the other. They both do exactly the same thing. This Tyndall is just a new way of being able to look at the code and being able to easily read it. Now, what that means is that we'll actually be able to easily edit it, right? Rather than having to understand the difficult JSON in the old format.
You finish this thought. I want to grab one thing to show you how much I love Tyndall. I should continue.
Excellent. I'll talk as Reed's off to grab his something about Tyndall, but there you go.
Yeah. Love it so much. I had a shirt that Timsel, not so much, but definitely.
I'm gonna have to get me one of these, Reed.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to get one. But yes, what I think though Tyndall is, and it really segues lovely with this new Power BI developer mode. So this Power BI developers mode is really interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts and kind of what you've seen of it so far, Reed.
So for the last part, the thoughts on Tyndall specifically, or was there one other question?
The Power BI developer mode as well.
Yeah, so two mentions. I dropped the link that Matthias graciously I was the second stream that he managed to do the Tyndall announcements on right after he announced it at SQL Bits. But the stream links in the chat. It will be outside of the scope of what we're talking about, but check that out. It is he does a great job explaining the implications of it, and it's not something that everyone's going to use. It will be for like data set developers. The business user isn't going to care, but a business analyst should learn about that language and how to leverage Tabular Editor, Visual Studio Code with some of that stuff. But it's the start of a lot of other things. Like that's the snowball at the top of the hill. That's in 2 years. Like you'll be amazed at the other stuff adjacent to that that'll be coming out. So check that out. And Steve's also mentioning Power BI developer mode. So again, there's also a deep dive that Rui, who is the program manager for that, he did with me a couple weeks ago. But that is the first time we've had a new Power BI file type since Power BI came out, I think. Because from the beginning, did we already have template files, or was that like a year? PBIT files? Did that come like a year or two after?
I want to say it came after.
I don't think it was. It was yeah. It was early, but it was
It's
only
been
within a
around
year
for
or
a while.
two of, yeah, it was really, really quick because the only difference is it just doesn't have data. But we had PBIP, so Power BI project file, and all Office files to begin with, just they're zip files anyways. They just contain a bunch of folders and objects that are inside of it, that are basically extracted and, read by whatever software is running it. And, inside of a PBIP file, you have separate files and structures basically for your reports and your data sets separately. So it's a great way for shared data sets. When you actually have a dedicated data set and 5 different reports, you can have one PBI project file that has that data set and then every single report that would be connected to it. And that is it folder structures it and places it into a folder next to the PBIP file. So then you actually have very easy Git management and all that. So that's a big game changer. I know I'm super frustrated when it comes to shared data sets. And then, well, if you make a change to the data set, then you publish it, and then you realize like something got renamed and the report's broken. So you have to delete the field or re-add it. Like the management of kind of, restructuring and organizing between those. And then you have to publish to wait for changes because it has to connect to this, the data set online. It's a clunky process for the developer. And Steve, you even built a tool 3 years ago, sometime a while back, that the hot swap connector that lets you immediately change from the published data set to the local SSAS instance that's running when you have Power BI Desktop open. So you could see, instant changes from your report to your data set as you're kind of iterating between those two, which was needed for anybody working on shared data sets. So this, to a degree, is going to help solve some of the headache from that. But it's still in preview to a degree right now. And we only have kind of half the equation because it's really beneficial for the data set layer. The report layer is still a bit of a black box for that. But just from a management perspective of single data set to shared data sets, I think this will really start to drive that 1.1 ratio that you mentioned. Maybe in a year it's going to be 1.2 and then 1.5, and it's hopefully going to start going up. But I think this is a big innovation for helping to encourage people to utilize that shared data set methodology with their Power BI tenant.
Yeah, and you mentioned the hot swap tool. I'm very looking forward to depreciating that once we have an official way of doing this in the project mode. So that's really exciting. You mentioned Git quite a lot. I want to take maybe some time now just to go over and explain, if people here may be not so familiar with Git and what we're talking about. Git is a type of version control. So I just want to take a minute or two and just kind of run through, what is Git? Help us give us some context of exactly what we're talking about.
Let's get to yours. Oh, there we go. Beautiful.
So what is Git? So we keep talking about Git, this project mode, Power BI developer mode, this project file, which is going to allow Git. So if you've not heard of Git, if you don't really understand, I want to give you a kind of high level here, what it is and why this project mode, this project file, this developer mode will allow Git and what we do with it. So Git really, high level, is version control. But how does it work? So imagine that we have our local machine here. So one thing of Git, it's distributed in Git systems, is distributed, all the ones Azure DevOps and GitHub. Typically, we look at, for example, think of doing things on our local machine. So we're not tied to doing something in a shared repository, shared area, and we're not all working on the same file. We're all kind of having our separate files on my local machine. So I might have this open up on my computer. Now, what you have on the left is some code that I'm writing. Now you can see this is a very small part of a data model. And Tyndall, this is kind of how it looks. And you'll see now it's kind of easy to understand what this means, right? We can say this is a data model. It's the price column. We've got the data type here, and the summarized by. So we can look at this, and I can actually open this in something like a text editor. And maybe what I do is I make a change. So I've got my data model. I'm writing directly. I'm adding code. I'm going to add a column. And once I add the column, I'm actually going to save it. So here I just have, I'm saving everything. I'm kind of checking it in into my machine and just saving as I go. Then I might make another change, right? I'm going to delete this column and now I'm going to save this and have another saved version. Because I'm all editing the code with Git, right? The idea is, hey, if I want to go back, I keep each saved version. So I'm not overwriting, right? I'm adding a new version. And this works easy in this code because these files are small. So I just got, version 1, 2, 3. I can go back into the past if I want and see any version of my code. And that's really, really helpful if I accidentally save or I do something wrong and I want to roll back. So what we do is we regularly save our versions of the code. And this is what we call a commit. So you may have heard this word. We commit, right? And this is our local machine. We're just making regular saves. Now, obviously, we don't want to just have this on our local machine. What we do have is a main copy of our code. So this is our in this case, it's a Tyndall data model file. It's the description of our Power BI data model. And we have it in a main copy. And then each developer will have their own copy and they're working on their own copy of the code. What this allows us to do, right? It allows loads of people to work on things at the same time, right? And then there's a central location where code and all the files are stored. And this is using this Git version control, it's called. And this is called a repo, a repository, right? And we call this the repo. So you may have heard people say, check this into the repo, stuff like that. What I want to do though, is I want to add my changes to the main copy. Typically we're not all doing big changes. All of the developers hopefully aren't doing the same work. There needs to be some communication around this, of course, but we're all editing little bits. I take it to my local machine. I regularly commit, I regularly save it. I said, okay, I'm done now. I think, the changes I've made, I want to put that back into the main copy. Obviously, I'm doing it isolated. So if I make mistakes, I'm not deleting reports that are live. And what I want to do is I add my change to the main copy. And I'm not replacing the whole file, right? I'm just replacing those little bits I've changed. So if I just change lines 6 and 7, I don't need to replace the whole file. I just need to overwrite lines 6 and 7. This means, right, if someone else is changing lines 9 and 10, we can both do this because we're not overwriting each other's stuff. We're just changing our little bits. And that's why it's called merging. Right? It's not an overwrite. We merge what we changed into the main copy. But of course, this is enterprise stuff. When I want to do this, I probably want to submit changes and it probably wants to be reviewed by someone, right? Because a good thing is we don't want just one person to do this without anyone else checking it. And this is a really good way of, we can raise a pull request. So if you heard that, and then other people can review, check what you've done is correct and check you haven't made any errors. Right? And when we're doing these merges, it allows us to do something really, really cool. And it's called a diff compare. And you can see here, this is actually in a Power BI deployment pipeline. So this is a Power BI. This is the old format. As you can see, it's quite much more difficult to read. But the diff compare, it kind of shows us what's changed. You can see here this red. So this is an example of a file that I changed. I deleted all this red parts, right? So the one on the left here, this is the file that was modified, the original one, and this is the development, the new one. So you can see the green is bits I've added, red is bits I've taken away.
Now I just want to pause here quickly. So this is coming from a very specific tool in the Power BI service, I believe, if I'm understanding the top interface, which is from deployment pipelines. So it's one thing that I feel like deployment, this is not emphasized enough, at least when I hear people talk about one really cool thing about it. Like, this is super nice. And yes, it's showing you really like detailed code, but every single change that's happening between them from the data set perspective, it doesn't do this for the report layer, by the way, but for the data, it is so nice to just, as you merge changes between stages, like it's one of my favorite selling points of like why would I want to go to a premium per user workspace, or anything like that? Like if you actually want to do easy enterprise management between those, like, dev, test, prod, and also have this built in without having to have any extra tools or installing software or anything else, it is a really nice feature of deployment pipelines. It's just this diff compare that lets you see that breakdown.
Yeah, and exactly, because this stops things like, oops, I've accidentally deleted a measure and I didn't even realize, and I save over my model, I've broken everything. So really, really cool. Now, obviously that's Git, and what is this Power BI developer mode? This is that project file. But essentially, this works, right? Git works better when you have lots of little files, because we're all working on different things. We're all working on bits. So if you have smaller files, it makes it a lot more manageable. You can imagine if this was 10,000 lines long and I had to go through and go through all 10,000 lines, it would take a long time. So we want little files. It works a lot better. So what this developer mode is, what it actually does is you have your Power BI desktop file, and you can save it into PBIP, Power BI project. And what that does, it actually is just saves into different folders. It creates a Power BI project folder, and inside it, you have one for your data set and one for your report. And then it splits out all the elements of both your data set and the report into individual files. And they're all text files. So it's just the code behind the scenes code on how it runs. So one of these, right, would be the TIMDL or the TIMSL file, the code on how this thing runs. I think eventually the idea, I assume, is probably we want to get more and more granular. You might have one for tables and measures. As Reed said, the report isn't probably there yet. It doesn't split things out much at the moment, but I think that's obviously going to come, because that's the whole point of doing this. The cool thing is then I can open something like Visual Studio Code or Notepad, and I can actually look at the code behind my report, the code behind my tables. And actually, I can even just change them if I know how to code well, and I understand things like TIMDL. I can just change them with my text editor. So that's really, really cool.
One little call out just on Visual Studio Code. I honestly, I think most of us who've ever touched Visual Studio have a really bad taste of Visual Studio. 10 years ago, there was always those memes where it's like, I guess it's time to start a Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go work out, get my groceries, run some errands. I'll come back in 2 hours and it'll be open. Like it was a necessary tool, but also a very slow tool. When this first came out, like I saw that name Visual Studio, I didn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. I also thought it might require a license. I still today have clients where like, I need this on the VM. Like, well, we need a license, right? No, it's free. It is a 15 megabyte install file. It's a very lightweight, easy to use, and it's honestly probably for Windows devices one of the best code editors, and it has a library of open source extensions for it. So just as a little encouragement, if you want to get it, don't worry about license or anything else, or then like, is it expensive and bloaty on my computer? It is a really, really cool tool, and I wish I had installed it like a year before I actually initially started using it.
Yeah, definitely. One of the best, and we'll see something else cool actually with it here. And then the other part of this, right now in Fabric, if you're going to be using Fabric, what you can actually do is you can sync, through Visual Studio. Another reason, Reed, why it's very cool. And you sync it with Azure DevOps, and this is that repo, right? So if you look at this probably, hopefully, looks a bit familiar. We have our local machine where we're going to be working and we're saving lots and lots of times using Visual Studio Code. We're committing. And then we have our main repo. So this is in Azure DevOps. And this is the main version of our code that once we've done with our edits, we're going to merge back up. And look, Visual Studio Code here. And it has this built-in view, right? Where you can actually see what you're doing in real time, the edit you're making, and you can see the changes that you're doing compared to the version that's in the repo that's live. So this is super cool because you can see everything, right? Before we might have downloaded the model, we're doing everything in the dark. What if we forget or we accidentally deleted something, or we forgot what the original version was? And we can see things and how they change. So obviously we can merge. And then what's really, really impressive is we do this in Azure DevOps. So Azure DevOps is a Git system. it holds the code, but this syncs automatically with a new Fabric workspace. So I can open my Visual Studio Code, write some edits, save it, commit it, merge it into my repo here, and then my data set will sync and refresh automatically and be updated with this new file. So really, really cool stuff. If you not work with Git, very much an enterprise level kind of solution. There is a lot of other ones as well. So not for everyone. And I think one thing we do like to do is match the solution with the team, with the type of report, with the type of data set, who's going to be looking after it. We won't go through today, but we have a tool out as well, Power BI version control. Chooses SharePoint. It's more aimed at business users. So maybe this is a bit too much for some people. SharePoint has built-in version history, which is really cool. So if you make an error, you can roll back any SharePoint file. Where always save everything in SharePoint, please. But yeah, so another option there.
Basically, it's your upgrade story. Like at the bare minimum, your like business OneDrive, which it is SharePoint. Everything in the backend is that. The upgraded version of that is the like actually creating a SharePoint site, which there's that configuration where you can have the check-in, check-out like specifically, which does prevent that like conflict files a little bit more, and you can have a note that's added to each version. So that's like the somewhat like you've gone one floor up, and then from there actually getting to Git integration. I still think only like half the story is here today. It's, we now have Fabric and the Git integrations for it. It's not doing that much else. If you are just working with Power BI PBX files today, Git's a nice to have, but not a need to have yet. Just because it's basically you're just versioning the file in Git, maybe with some extra enterprise architecture versus SharePoint, but you still just have history of the files. Once, in theory, we get the complete story of Tyndall, and then hopefully something like that for the reporting layer, that's when I really think like Git's going to explode out, because then you have everything that can be managed from a code perspective for your reports and your data sets. And then that's why I think there will be companies will finally start to see a buy-in from that perspective of really integrating with either GitHub or Azure DevOps between either of those scenarios. And I know that GitHub is already on the pipeline with the Git integration in Power BI. It's just not available today. You only have DevOps right now for the options.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of this though, it's been a long time coming. If this all seems and read me a bit too much for a lot of people, just a step in the right direction, right? Start by saving somewhere you can roll back, and as Reed says, it's this kind of enterprise and grow up story.
Exactly. But I think it's starting the journey of a lot of really cool things to come. I think we are at a pivotal moment, not just with the enterprise features for Power BI, but it's like the Fabric stuff that's I think will mature very quickly once it starts to come out of that. I'll just make one other kind of anecdotal comment. I love the idea of Fabric. I've had a lot of clients come out like, oh, can we just switch over? Can we move our entire infrastructure into that? Like, I think it's great to explore, to have some test cases, maybe at a department or a branch level or something else where there's a team that can start to utilize the data sets, OneLake and all that. I think there is start that journey now a little bit if you are wanting to consider some of the mini features that are in Fabric. And I have other streams that talk about all that. But like with anything in preview, it's one of those where you go into the shallow end of the pool, and in 12 to 24 months, once all these other things come out of preview, that's when that larger migration story can start to happen for most of the organizations that would want to leverage the stuff as those new features come out.
Definitely. So I'm interested to hear.
Yeah, well, and partially, I know I just want to be cognizant of your time, Steve, and loving the momentum of the conversations. But considering we have, I'd say like 10, 15 minutes, so I'll do two things. Where would you like to direct the conversation? And then as you are commenting on that, I want to again open up for anybody that has remaining questions that they want us to talk about. I do want to give opportunity for 5 or 10 minutes of that at the very end. So if I missed a question earlier, drop that in with the queue. And those can be some things that we can also talk about as we're wrapping up today as well.
Yeah, definitely. You know, a lot of things we do want to talk about as well is managing your solution here. I think Fabric's going to be very interesting. It might change quite a lot in the back end, stuff like that. I think still though, we're going to need to have Power BI quite often and still do the things that we've been doing. For example, dataset refreshes, this sort of stuff, how we design models when we do Fabric is going to open a lot of more options and a lot more ways we can get data, we can import data. You know, it's bringing this new direct lake mode, which is really going to change things on how we pull data in. With
That's the
that
number
said,
one thing. That direct lake, just like it is. We don't have the time to like dive deeply into that now, but like that is the evolution of direct query, and it is going to be a big game changer that will just simplify it. It reduces data movement and the amount of transfer where you have to copy data as much with import stuff. So for anybody dealing with large data sets or data that needs to be distributed to a lot of different locations, and you want to park your fact table somewhere, that's going to be really, really powerful if you're leveraging that. That's my favorite feature that's as part of the new platform implementation.
Definitely, it's really exciting, and I'll post out. You can see on my name as well. I'll post out a quick video in a moment on the chat. If you're not familiar with Direct Lake, I've got a quick 40-minute overview of everything Fabric, very very high level. But Reed, then I'm interested in hearing your thoughts as well. Knowing everything's coming, knowing all this additional stuff that's coming into kind of the Power BI land with Fabric, really exciting for people with a Power BI developer background or working in Power BI reporting, because I think it's really opening up a lot more into the realm of Power BI and having that Power BI as a focus here, right? And now we're looking at all these enterprise architectures. I'm interested in Reed hearing a couple of your thoughts on how you manage that and kind of maybe your top takeaways in terms of anything around sharing or access and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, is this sharing and access in regards to the data sets, or just some of the new items specifically related to Fabric?
Yeah, I think probably the data sets. I think Fabric, we're all still getting there, but definitely around the data sets themselves.
Yeah. So, I mean, the conversations, at least around sharing and distribution, I mean, we have like at least role level security, object level security. But I do know a big one that I think will continue to become important. Just tie off and finish off the conversation of Fabric, because workspaces are going to have more and more objects, and we obviously want to enforce and secure those. But actually bringing it back to the topic of upgraded enterprise architecture, I do think that people often give way too many elevated permissions. Like very commonly, I will come into a workspace and you look at your access list and like, oh, there's like 35 people added in here. Like, oh, actually, yeah, like 7 of these people don't even work for the company anymore. Like, there needs to be better management of the users in there. And I mean, in general, outside of 1 or 2 admins, you should almost never have a single person as a member of the workspace. Like, especially if they don't have build permissions to a degree. But usually, I would hope to see like 5 or less items added to the access list of a workspace. It's going to be maybe a couple of the main admins who are managing it. The rest of them should be maybe like a user, an active directory group that are the people who are the report builders. So those are your member contributor access between those two. And then the report viewers, which should hopefully be a much larger active directory group as well. But then, of course, you don't have to manage the workspace. You just simply manage the active directory groups. Same kind of with role of security. In a perfect world, you have a user-based security in a model, which is what I recommend everybody implements. And then with a active directory group with the whole company added to the group, once you publish it, you never have to touch the security group again. Hopefully the SQL database is managing that security table in your model, and whatever user gets to see like what categorical ID that's filtering your dimensional table, and then the permission list for people to access it is already managed because you've added the right active directory group into the security model. Big takeaway for any of that is permissions and sharing is the golden child of all of this is Active Directory groups. Nothing should be added at the individual person level because then it requires so much more micromanagement.
Exactly. I think a couple of key takeaway points I took away from there. Using the groups is my number one thing I say to people. It is so difficult to understand who shared when you start sharing things individually. Really depends as well. And I think having a strategy, there's a lot of ways to build these strategies in terms of how we set these groups, whether you kind of organize it, department, by reports, by groups, lots of different strategies you can go down. But I think having some strategy, just having some thought around it, and really, little steps in the right direction is really good. You don't have to have the perfect strategy, do everything perfectly day one, but if by day two you can do slightly better than you did the day before, just having some groups set up really, really helps, and just having a mind frame into having some thought and logic around it. And I think this kind of brings in there's two kind of main documents that I would really want to bring up, which I can run through quickly now. It really helps build this strategy. Now, this might not be your role, but typically whenever we talk about these governance and looking to roll things out, this comes even more as we were talking about when we have this fabric, when we have these huge, more and more elements in this, we have a lot more people, and we have things like all this DevOps and this source control. Several documents, but two of them that I want to highlight, I'd really recommend that organizations produce. The first one is a RACI, and this is nothing Microsoft, this is nothing Power BI, but it just lists out people and tasks. And it just says who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for each task. I'm not going to spend too much on this slide. You can Google this. It's a management tool. It's a project management tool out there. But in terms of a Power BI, right, what we'd want to do is have something like this. We'll split our company and we'll have different roles. Power BI Champions Network is generally these very strong Power BI. Probably a lot of you people spending your Friday, possibly Friday night for some of you watching this, right? You're probably in this Power BI Champions Network. You have these different areas, and you'll do things like create deployment pipeline. We talked about Git, right? The Power BI champions, they would be the ones responsible for this. Okay, maybe, and this could be different in another company. Ultimately, the data steward, and this is normally a role who looks after Git. They're accountable, so it's their head. They're the ones that gets told off if it doesn't get done, but it's between both them and the champions who do it. And then the admin, whoever the admin is, they need to be consulted. They just kind of need to be told what's going on. And you'll see how this document really helps you put this logic and put this strategy around who's responsible and making sure we have someone doing each task, right? When we have so many new things and we have version control, all this source control, you can get lost. So making sure there is someone who's able to do this and listing out the tasks, the people, and who's going to do them, kind of as simple as that. The second one I always tell people to do is create process maps, right? If you're having a strategy around Active Directory, sharing, something like this, design a map on how to do this, a process map. And what they look like is, this is, for example, a dataset certification. Maybe I want to certify a dataset, make sure this dataset looks correct. I might have a Power BI champions and the content creator. So the content creator might say, hey, I'm going to submit my data set for certification. Then the process will go to the Power BI champion. They might run these data model checks. Reid spoke about these might get better and better as generative AI and stuff comes out. Then they say, is this data set good enough for certification? Is it following a good data model, star schema, that kind of stuff? If not, right, say, hey, we can't certify this. It needs to go back and it needs to have some improvements. If it does, though, if it satisfies your data model checks, maybe then you'll run it through the CI/CD pipeline. Now, if you're not familiar what this is, it's a dev test prod. And basically, high level, we're testing it, right? Doing our test, visual tests, testing the data. Again, if it fails, we say, hey, this has gone through our tests and it's failed. Otherwise, it might pass. And we say, okay, we can certify it. So this is a nice example of quite a simple process map. Kind of lists who needs to do which action and what action they need to take, right? And this goes alongside your AC, where it says who's responsible and who's accountable for different tasks. So I think these are two that I would really recommend people look at and deploy them, talk to people, talk to the people who would do this, and make sure these are there. If anything, it just helps you. It can be very, very simple when you start, but it really helps you put some logic around stuff and have a process for doing something.
And I think the one other thing, just as a call, kind of with just as I mentioned for CI/CD and like moving between those, is often like your dev test to prod is it's also the data set you're connecting to, which once again is what's so useful about having the deployment pipelines. Is you have proper parameters set up, you can either filter your data set or change easily between your dev versus test or production databases as well. As an example, if you're developing, and making changes, you don't necessarily need to have 48 million rows of, of data in your fact table until you actually start to test the data. So you should hopefully be working off of a smaller section of that, either through a filter or through testing, connecting to dummy data to a degree. But your database admin will be very happy if you're not doing large data pulls on a development file.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with parameters and stuff to help all of this.
Exactly. But just kind of to circle back on some of the stuff that we've been talking about and some of the stuff that we'll be also talking about a bit more is, again, like we're wanting to cover kind of a nice little breadth rather than depth approach with many of these different conversations. But a lot of these are things that we have curated into about a 2-day training that we'll actually be delivering a couple of times here coming up in September. So this webinar is designed to be kind of a stand on its own best practices and hopefully some good takeaways from you and some good conversations between two people who've spent a lot of years building out this stuff for enterprise clients. But also, again, kind of a gentle nod for anybody who wants to learn some more information on this and actually take away through a lot of labs and exercises. We have ones coming up in the first week and then the last week of September, both for European and more like Oceania, Australia, New Zealand time zones. We'll be doing two kind of half-day trainings between the two of those. So for anyone wanting to check that out, I can drop some links in for the chat as well for all of you to go explore and give you an opportunity to maybe join some of us there. I think last time we had, was it 50, somewhere between like 55 to 60 people, I think, registered.
Yeah, I think it's about between 50 and 60. As Reed said, we kind of went through all of this, but really, really interesting Q&A sessions there. We got to chat with all the participants, had some really, really cool conversations, had a lot of fun teaching it, I think.
Exactly.
Was great, and I really appreciate everyone who turned up last time, the 50, 60 people there and really participated. Very happy and why we're running it twice more.
Yeah, I mean, and like it's we, as much as we like to do free content, like it's this is how we also earn our our rent and the pint at the pub at the end of the day. So it's something that for anyone who is interested in learning some cool stuff and can get maybe a work credit, because I think we probably had about at least half the people attending were individuals who are doing continued learning from usually their work that is willing to chip in for that. So hope to see some of you there. And I love to teach. That's one of the reasons that I travel around the world on a pretty regular basis and enjoy conferences and workshops and pre-cons. At this point, if I was to count on a hand, or probably hands and toes, the number of workshops that I've done, it's paid workshops has probably been about at least 30 to 40. If I count the presentations that I've done, free and paid, it's got to be up there with maybe like 120, 140 different times that I've presented and taught. And this is just non-academic. both of us have actually taught classes at university as well. You were the University of Wisconsin, I think, right? And I've been at University of Washington. Yeah.
Yeah, Wisconsin, Milwaukee at the
yeah,
the continuing education. So yeah, great fun doing that, and yeah, we both love to teach and chat, and just great way to get to talk with people as well, and hear people, and hopefully impart some knowledge that helps people grow.
Exactly. But now that we're about at a 10:36 and starting to wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to kind of cover to finish off? And I think you've been answering some questions in the chat. So if there's any remaining questions, feel free to drop it in there with a Q. We can finish those. But otherwise, yeah, Steve, how would you like to wrap up?
No, definitely. I think that's been great. Really interesting to hear your thoughts, and look forward to doing the rest of the classes with you. Of course, if more questions do pop up, or if you're watching this on demand and you're not here for the live, come find me and Reed on LinkedIn. Definitely come join us, follow us. We love to post there and keep up, because we're doing a lot of content. Hopefully get a lot more of this free webinars and some smaller kind of free sessions out there as well.
And links down below to contact us and to check out the course as well. But otherwise, also, I just wanted to mention that Steve and I are working on a financial course as well, that will be kind of like data modeling and reporting from a finance perspective. So that's your FP&A type data, P&L reports, any kind of budgeting and forecasting type data. So we'll both have a mixture, kind of structured and then some like page structured free and paid content around that we'll have as little webinar type stuff, and then some longer trainings. But that's something that we're planning to get out there sometime in the fall. So a little bit of a sneak peek for that.
Yeah, really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, absolutely. But otherwise, then I don't see any other questions. I want to thank everyone for tuning in today, and for those watching the live stream later. And then otherwise, I will see you all next week on my next stream. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks so much, Reed, for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everyone, take care and have a great weekend. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.